For 12 serene years, Clark Jensen had enjoyed a quiet, dignified life in Willowbrook Estate, a community he once described to friends as a neighborhood frozen in time, in the best way. Nestled at the edge of a cul-de-sac and anchored by mature trees, his corner lot home stood as a reflection of both his values and his profession. Clark, a landscape designer by trade, had poured his soul into sculpting his lawn into an organic tapestry. Vibrant native grasses, seasonal color bursts from red salvia and purple verbena, and an ornamental Japanese maple that shaded his wraparound porch like a guardian. There had never been drama, never a raised voice in the street, never a note on his door. The HOA board, once a team of mild-mannered retirees who cared more about barbecue potlucks than backyard pergola heights, had remained mostly hands-off. Clark had attended exactly one HOA meeting in over a decade, mostly to drop off a plant arrangement as a favor. He liked it that way. His clients were demanding enough. His own home was supposed to be his sanctuary. But 3 years ago, the atmosphere began to shift. It started subtly. The newsletters became more rigid. Lawn inspections became quarterly instead of annual. A neighbor, named Paul, was forced to repaint his mailbox 3 shades darker because it violated some new visibility ordinance. A handwritten note, unsigned but obviously from the HOA, was left on Clark's porch one morning, gently advising him to reconsider the wind chimes on his porch as they might disrupt ambient harmony. Clark chuckled. Ambient harmony? That's a new one. Still, he let it slide. You don't pick fights with people who have nothing better to do. Then came the mass email with the new HOA seal, bold, with serif letters and a tagline in italicized gray that read, "Preserving Excellence." It was official. The HOA had turned from neighborly oversight to corporate-like governance. And at the center of this transformation stood one woman, Doris. McNelt moved into Willowbrook Estate like a thunderclap in a blue sky. She and her husband, Charles, a quiet, near-invisible man with a fondness for crossword puzzles, purchased the 2-story colonial down the road from Clark. Within a month of arrival, Doris had introduced herself to every resident with a branded clipboard, a plate of gluten-sensitive brownies, and a list of inspirational ideas for community uplift. No one knew quite what to make of her at first. She wasn't rude, exactly. She was invasive. She wore athletic skirts with windbreakers, in pastel tones, and she knocked on doors with the insistence of someone expecting applause for doing so. She once stood on Clark's porch for 10 full minutes, asking whether he'd considered replacing his brick pavers with a more cohesive, neutral palette in accordance with the neighborhood's upcoming vision alignment. Clark had smiled politely and closed the door mid-sentence. Somehow, within the year, Doris had nominated herself for HOA president and won. "It's just a volunteer gig," someone had muttered at the annual meeting. But it wasn't. Not to Doris. She rewrote the bylaws. She instituted fines for visible seasonal clutter, translation, pumpkins after Thanksgiving. She banned chalk drawings on sidewalks. She personally audited Christmas lights for exceeding nuisance lumens. Clark remained cordial. He didn't attend meetings, didn't stir the pot. But quietly he began noticing how neighbors spoke, in hushed tones when Doris walked past. How children stopped riding scooters on the sidewalk because they were tired of being filmed and flagged for reckless conduct. How mailbox flyers now included warnings about non-conforming grass length. Still, Clark hoped, naively, that if he stayed out of her way, she'd stay out of his. That hope ended the day he put up the sign. Clark's corner lot driveway had always been something of a neighborhood convenience. For years, it had been a benign quirk. Some neighbors, trying to shave 5 seconds off their drive, would loop through his circular driveway instead of going around the cul-de-sac. It happened maybe once a day, and Clark didn't mind. But lately, it had become constant. He counted one afternoon, 17 cars in a single hour, some not even slowing down. A minivan once clipped his hedge. Another vehicle rolled past while his contractor was unloading stone for a new back patio, nearly causing an accident. And then it wasn't just neighbors. Amazon drivers, ride shares, strangers who didn't even live in Willowbrook. Word had gotten out that Clark's circular drive provided a shortcut, and people were treating it like a public street. The final straw came one Thursday morning. A black SUV, windows tinted to legal maximum, cut the corner hard and blew through his drive just as his dog Toby, a sprightly corgi mix, was chasing a butterfly near the garden. Clark watched, heart hammering, as the car missed Toby by inches. That night, he poured himself a glass of bourbon and sat on the porch, staring at the drive. Enough was enough. The sign was modest. Professional. A simple rectangular slate, 6 inches tall, white letters on dark green. Private driveway. Do not enter. He had it mounted cleanly to a wooden stake and placed it strategically where drivers would see it before making the turn. He didn't think twice about it. It wasn't an eyesore, it wasn't offensive. And more importantly, it worked. The drive-thrus stopped almost immediately. A few curious drivers slowed down, considered the message, and moved on. Clark's porch regained its silence. The birds returned. Even Toby seemed calmer. Clark smiled. Just a little problem, solved like a grown-up. But the serenity didn't last long. 3 days later, on a bright Saturday morning, the peace shattered. Clark was trimming back some rosemary near the porch when he heard the slap of flip-flops on pavement. He looked up, and there she was. Doris McNelt, hair pulled tight into a blonde visor-cap ponytail. Clipboard in one hand, a pink thermos clutched in the other. And fury, pure fury, etched into every inch of her tanned face. "Clark!" she barked. He stood slowly. "Good morning, Doris." "What is that?" she shrieked, stabbing the air with her clipboard like a dagger. "That sign!" Clark blinked. "It's a driveway sign. It's to stop people from—" "That is not authorized," she howled, marching up the driveway like she owned it. "That violates Section 3.2 of Article 7. No external signage without pre-approval." Clark raised an eyebrow. "Is that the section on holiday decorations or—" "Don't get smart with me," she barked, cutting him off. "That sign is an eyesore. It disrupts the uniformity of the neighborhood," Clark gestured calmly. "It's 6 inches tall, Doris, green and white. It matches the HOA's own garden plaques." She stomped her foot. "That's not the point. I was not informed. You do not get to make decisions about what people see without the HOA board's full visual review." Clark couldn't help himself. "And what visual review approved your plastic flamingo wreath last Easter?" Her eyes widened with outrage. She took a step closer, closing the gap. Her clipboard now jammed between them like a badge of authority. "I will be issuing you a formal violation notice," she hissed. "And if that sign is not removed within 72 hours, you will be fined daily until you comply." "Understood," Clark said coolly, barely concealing the smirk on his face. But Doris wasn't finished. She spun around on her heel, marched down the driveway, stopped halfway, and began shouting at the air. "I am the HOA. I represent this community. This is a legal breach of uniformity and access norms. I will not be disrespected." Clark stood still, arms crossed, as neighbors poked their heads out from behind curtains and carports. And then Doris did something that would go down in Willowbrook. Legend. She ripped off her flip-flop and slammed it against his mailbox. Then she raised it in the air, shouting, "This is your final warning!" Toby barked. A crow in the Japanese maple cawed. And Clark pulled out his phone and hit record. Clark had always considered himself a reasonable man. When someone parked too close to his driveway, he left a polite note. When kids ran through his garden, he replanted without fuss. But what happened with Doris, her storming onto his property, screaming about a professionally made sign, waving a flip-flop like a gavel in a kangaroo court, wasn't just unreasonable. It was harassment. The moment Doris disappeared down the street, flip-flops slapping like drumbeats of authoritarian pride, Clark walked inside, downloaded the phone video and began writing. His fingers hovered over the keyboard at first. What did one even say in a complaint to the HOA, when the HOA was the problem? He drafted and redrafted, trying to sound calm, professional, and not like a man being stalked by a woman in leisure wear. To whom it may concern, he began. On the morning of June 1st at approximately 9:30 a.m., HOA President Doris McNelt entered my private driveway without invitation, shouted threats of fines regarding a safety sign placed on my property, and struck my mailbox repeatedly, with her footwear, while issuing what she referred to as a final warning. He attached the video, just enough of it to show Doris's tantrum without inflaming things further, and requested a formal hearing with the board. Then, after a long exhale, he sent it. He didn't expect much. Maybe a slap on the wrist. A forced apology. But deep down, something in him hoped someone would finally say, enough. The hearing never came. Instead, 2 days later, Clark found a bright yellow envelope stuck to his door, then another, then 3 more by the end of the week. Each was marked Violation Notice in bold red text. Violation 1. Improper signage not cleared by Aesthetic Review Committee. Violation 2. Mailbox fading to non-standard hue. Charcoal. There's HOA slate. Violation 3. Excessive fragrance from rosemary bush during bloom period. Violation 4. Outdoor wind chimes, audible from sidewalk. Decibel report pending. Violation 5. Porch bench paint mismatch. Color must align. With trim code 47. Clark laughed the first day, smirked the second. By the third, his neighbor Paul came by and whispered, "She's done this before. Ran the Delaney family out over a birdbath she didn't like." It didn't stop. Every morning a new notice appeared. Every envelope carried the same smug little signature at the bottom. D. McNelt, HOA President. The final straw wasn't even the sign. It came when Clark received a bill for $975 in accumulated fines, with a note stating that if payment wasn't received in 30 days, a lien would be placed on his property. Clark stared at the letter, then turned and looked at his beloved garden. He clenched his fists. She wants a war? Fine. It started innocently enough. Clark shared the video. He posted it in the private Willowbrook Facebook group, captioned simply, "Is this the behavior we expect from an HOA president?" The video showed Doris storming up the driveway, screaming about visual harmony, and ending with her slap-hitting his mailbox with a flip-flop while screaming, "This is your final warning!" It went viral in the group in less than 20 minutes. Neighbors who had once whispered their frustrations suddenly found courage. Comments poured in. "She fined us $100 for leaving a bike in the yard for 1 hour. We got dinged for having a patriotic flag that wasn't regulation. She yelled at my teenager for sidewalk chalk art. Who does that?" And then came the memes. One featured Doris wielding a glowing flip-flop like Thor's hammer. Another was a still frame of her shouting, superimposed with, "I am the HOA," in bold letters like a Marvel villain poster. Even local high schoolers caught wind and started calling her Flip-Flop McNelte. Within a week, Flip-Flop Gate was trending on the local Nextdoor app. Clark didn't revel in the attention, but he didn't stop it either. For the first time, people were talking, openly resisting, and realizing they weren't alone. Doris, however, was livid. When public opinion turned, Doris didn't back off. She doubled down. First, she issued an emergency order restricting unauthorized digital representations of HOA leadership. Then she sent cease and desist letters to every neighbor who commented on Clark's post, claiming defamation and emotional damages. One poor teenager, 11-year-old Rachel Klein, got a handwritten letter demanding she remove all chalk representations of my likeness from public sidewalks or face escalation. But it got worse. Doris began patrolling the neighborhood on foot with her iPad, filming residents for evidence gathering. She stared down children, interrogated teens about trash bins, and once chased a jogger for using non-compliant earbuds. Her crowning moment came when she attempted to enter Clark's backyard without permission to inspect hedge uniformity. Toby, loyal as ever, chased her out with furious barking. Clark called the sheriff. Unfortunately, it was a civil matter. The deputy was polite, sympathetic even, but said without a restraining order or actual trespassing injury, there wasn't much they could do. I recommend starting a formal neighborhood petition, the deputy advised. And that's when the idea clicked. Clark didn't need to fight Doris alone. The neighborhood was already behind him. It was time to make it official. The petition launch happened in Clark's garage. He invited a dozen neighbors, young parents, retired teachers, couples who'd kept their heads down for years. They brought folding chairs, iced tea, and stories. Some were nervous, some were furious, but all were ready. Clark stood in front of a dry erase board with a heading, HOA Board Recall Process. Step 1, Petition to remove President. Paul brought copies of the bylaws. Sarah from 2 doors down brought printer paper and a spreadsheet. Even grumpy old Harold, who hadn't left his porch in 3 years, showed up with homemade flyers that said, "Enough with the flip-flop fascism." Over the next 2 weeks, Clark went door to door, respectfully, calmly, never pushing. He asked people not just to sign, but to speak, and they did. 84 signatures. More than enough. At the next HOA meeting, the room overflowed. Dozens of residents packed the clubhouse. Doris stood at the podium trying to maintain her smug smile, clipboard clutched like a Bible. Clark approached the microphone with a stack of signed forms in his hand. Per Section 6.4 of the HOA bylaws, he said calmly, "We, the residents of Willowbrook Estate, submit this petition for the immediate removal of President Doris McNelt." Gasps. Applause. A single child in the back shouted, "Down with the flip-flop!" Doris went red. You people are ungrateful. This is a coordinated attack on order and beauty." Clark raised a brow. Or maybe it's just a bunch of folks who are tired of being ruled by footwear and fear. The board took the papers. The vote would happen in 2 weeks. Doris stormed out, knocking over a stack of HOA pamphlets on her way. And as Clark turned back toward his seat, neighbors clapped, him on the back, smiled warmly, and one man whispered, "You just saved this neighborhood, brother." As the recall vote loomed, Doris McNelt was a woman on the edge. Her polished veneer of suburban superiority cracked more with each passing day. Her daily HOA patrols turned frantic. She carried a clipboard thicker than the town phone book and marched through the neighborhood like a general inspecting enemy lines. But her composure was gone. When a child's inflatable unicorn pool toy was spotted 2 feet past the backyard fence line, Doris took a photo and issued a blatant decorum breach violation. She fined the Patterson twins $75 for unauthorized lemonade commerce. And she stood at the entrance to the community dog park for 4 hours, demanding to see licenses and rabies certifications from every pet owner, until someone called animal control on her. The community was laughing behind her back, but Doris wasn't stupid. She knew the numbers. The petition signatures were valid. The recall meeting would be packed. The odds were not in her favor, so she resorted to her nuclear option. On the Friday before the vote, Clark awoke to the sound of construction, right in front of his house. Team of HOA contracted workers had arrived with cones, signage, and a permit signed by Doris. They were installing a community bulletin board on Clark's front lawn easement. "I didn't approve this," Clark said, storming outside in slippers. One worker handed him a typed notice. "By emergency resolution, The HOA authorizes erection of communication infrastructure as deemed necessary by the President to ensure unity and decorum compliance. Clark's jaw clenched. The bulletin board was massive, 8 feet tall, laminated glass, anchored in concrete, and front and center was a poster labeled, "Vote No to Chaos, Save Willowbrook from Mob Rule." And beneath it, a photoshopped picture of Clark holding a Molotov cocktail. Clark blinked. She made me look like I'm starting a riot, with a bottle of kombucha. The neighborhood was stunned. Even those who hadn't supported the petition agreed she'd crossed the line. That night, someone duct-taped a pair of dollar store flip-flops to the new board with a note, "Let the people speak, Doris." The night of the vote felt like an election in a small town. And in many ways, it was. The Willowbrook clubhouse overflowed with neighbors, young and old. People brought lawn chairs, camped on the grass, and stood in line just to witness the moment. Clark arrived wearing a blue button-down and jeans. Simple, respectful. His sign, the one that started it all, remained tucked under his arm, like a quiet symbol of defiance. Doris entered to booze. She wore a matching tracksuit, arms crossed, clipboard in hand. She sneered at Clark as she passed. The board called the meeting to order. Tonight we review the community-submitted petition for the recall of HOA President Doris McNelt. Per Bylaw Section 6.4, we require a 2/3 majority of present homeowners to pass the motion. Clark was invited to speak first. He walked to the microphone and unfolded his sign. He held it up. "Drive like your kids live here." "That's all this ever was," he said. "I wasn't trying to stage a revolution. I wasn't trying to cause chaos. I was trying to keep kids safe. But that sign was called an eyesore. Then I got fined. Then harassed. Then, well, you've all seen the video. What I want isn't power. What I want is a neighborhood where we don't live in fear of potted plant citations or being screamed at over mailbox paint." The room applauded. Then Doris stepped up. She didn't smile. She didn't soften. "You people think this is a joke," she barked. "You think I enjoy enforcing rules? You think it's fun being the only one keeping this neighborhood from turning into a circus of gnomes, ugly signs, and lawn chairs in the front yard? Silence. I made this place desirable. I made it beautiful. You all liked it when your property values went up. And now you want to throw me out because of a man with a dog and a sign?" Someone in the back shouted, "You hit a mailbox with a flip-flop." More laughter. The vote commenced. Each homeowner dropped a sealed envelope into a ballot box under board supervision. Clark watched nervously. Doris sat stiffly, arms locked. 30 minutes passed. The board president returned, cleared his throat, and read, "Per counted votes, the motion to remove Doris McNelte as HOA president has passed with 72.4%. The crowd erupted. People stood, clapping. Some cried. A woman threw a pair of rubbers, flip-flops into the air like graduation caps. And in the middle of it all, Clark stood quietly, relief washing over him. "Doris?" She stormed out without a word, clipboard trembling in her hand. 2 nights after the vote, Willowbrook slept peacefully. Porch lights flickered, sprinklers hummed. All was calm, except for the sound of rubber soles scraping across pavement. At 2:13 a.m., a figure crept into Clark's yard. Dressed in black sweatpants and a hoodie pulled tight, she darted between trees, ducked under a camellia bush, and moved toward the one thing that still mocked her authority. That cursed sign. Clark's original aluminum sign, bolted to a metal stake, stood tall near his driveway. The words, "Drive like your kids live here," were reflective, clear, and now iconic in Willowbrook. Doris knelt. She pulled a can of black spray paint from her fanny pack and began to shake it violently. Then she sprayed a giant red X across the sign. She scribbled the words "illegal" and "traitor" across it. Then, as if possessed, she yanked the post, snapping it in half. She stared at her work, panting. Then she turned and came face to face with a blinking red camera. Clark had installed a motion-activated security camera after the final violation wave, and this time, it caught everything. The next morning, Clark received 5 emails from neighbors. They'd seen her too. One even caught her on their doorbell cam, waddling away with the busted sign in hand. He called the sheriff. They arrived an hour later, and this time Clark pressed charges: trespassing, destruction of private property, and harassment. The arrest was swift. Deputies showed up at Doris's door, where she greeted them in her bathrobe and signature pink slippers. When they showed her the footage, she refused to speak. She was handcuffed on her own front lawn as neighbors peeked out windows, stunned. For the first time in Willowbrook history, the HOA president, now former, was charged with criminal trespass and malicious destruction of property. A week later, at the emergency board meeting, she was formally banned from serving in any HOA leadership role for life. Her nameplate was removed. Her access to the HOA Facebook group was revoked. She was, quite literally, erased from the rulebook. Doris moved out within a month. Rumor had it she relocated to an RV community in Central Florida. A few neighbors joked they pitied those RVs. Clark, meanwhile, bought a new sign. He placed it in the same spot, only this time on a thicker post made of steel. And next to it, he planted a small wooden plaque with simple words carved in: community, not control. 3 months later, the board needed a new president. People asked Clark. He resisted at first, not wanting to trade his garden shears for gavel drama. But the people insisted. Not for his authority, but for his balance, his compassion. At the fall HOA meeting, Clark was elected with unanimous approval. His first act as president? He revised the codebook, trimmed the excessive language, struck out dozens of clauses about mailbox trim and flagpole height. He introduced what he called the neighbor clause. No rule shall be enforced without reasonable cause, kind communication, and 3 attempts at peaceful resolution. The community applauded. Clark didn't hold meetings in a stuffy clubhouse. He held them in his backyard, with iced tea and Toby wagging his tail. He made sure every voice mattered, even if it disagreed with his own. And most importantly, the sign stayed up. People began putting up their own versions across Willowbrook. Slow down, we have toddlers. We wave here. This neighborhood is not a dictatorship. And tucked quietly at the end of each street, someone placed a final tribute to the rebellion that changed everything. A little wooden flip-flop nailed to a post, painted gold.